And listeners, today I'm really excited to have our next guest, David Simnick, the founder of Soapbox and Bushwick Kitchen, and many other very interesting entrepreneurial ventures, which he'll go into in a bit. David, as the founder of Soapbox, started about over a decade ago, and Soapbox is an impact-driven organization that not only sells personal care products, but also benefits underserved communities from around the world by donating 1 bar of soap for every sale they make. Welcome, David.
Dan, it is such a incredible honor to be here, and I'd feel really remiss, and I'm so sorry. You totally just told me this like 5 minutes beforehand. I should have said this. I'm a co-founder of Soapbox. There's a amazing team here that makes all this possible, and the original founders with me are just wonderful people. But I'm really excited to get into tell the story about how we started in my college kitchen and all the challenges that we faced and the myriad of poor decisions we made to get to where we are and some really exciting things ahead of us.
Well, thanks for the clarification, David. Well, as the co-founder of Soapbox, one thing I typically like to ask all the co-founders who come on the show is how did they get started in entrepreneurship? But I know you told this story many times before in many other podcasts, so I won't. I'll kind of just summarize the beginnings for our listeners, and then you can feel free to highlight any part that you felt like I didn't tell correctly. It seems like even when you're a kid, you were running a lot of entrepreneurial ventures. Like you had your own candy stand, you were rallying the neighborhood kids in the fourth grade to create a newspaper, and you always had this entrepreneurial drive, even from the very early days. And this led into your college days when, as you mentioned, you were making soap in your dorm room kitchen. This later kind of blended into your experience when you joined US Aid to provide clean water around the world. And it naturally seemed like your public service inclination and your orientation towards entrepreneurship, it had this very natural marriage into what later became Soapbox. But maybe you can tell the listeners what was the most crazy moment that you had in the early days of Soapbox, and just when you were getting started and thinking, "Oh man, like, is this really for me? Is entrepreneurship really what I want to do?"
Where to start? Probably one of the funniest parts is my landlord thought I was making meth. Like that, like that was definitely a shock. Um, but I don't blame him. Like what 22-year-old man starts making soap in a college kitchen with six other dudes? So that probably was more likely of a conclusion that I was making illicit drugs. Uh, it, we had no idea what we were doing. Like I can't emphasize enough that we had just no clue. And I think if we actually knew what we were doing, we probably wouldn't have done everything that we did because it's just so difficult to go up against these behemoths in the industry. Procter and Gamble, Unilever, Colgate Palmolive, Kenvue. They are formidable, like formidable opponents. Uh, and we've come a long way. We still have a very long way to go. There are various different retailers that were a top 10 within the categories that we compete in. We're often the only privately held within that top 10. We're a fastest growing or number one SKU in a couple categories, and that is really fun. It is really fun, and it's also something that I give our team so much credit towards because um, we've brought on a lot of people from those formidable competitors to come and join our team to make a difference, to give back and make thoughtful, crafted products that are natural and free from and just what we think are better alternatives. So, with all that being said, I'd say one of the early stories is I was demoing in one of the early chain stores we got into. And this lady started crying after I told her about our one for one mission. And that's when I hadn't gone full time yet. None of the team members, well, none of the original co-founders had gone full time on Soapbox yet, and that's when I made the decision. I was like, okay, if we can hit an emotional chord with soap, um, and if this mission resonates so much with this consumer, then I think there's a chance that this could become a household brand, and we're hopefully on the way there.
That's fantastic. I mean, from being a alleged uh, drug dealer to a purpose-driven brand that makes the buyer weep, I think that's a huge turnaround story right there. You're kind of just
From meth
piggybacking on,
maker to soap maker. Yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah.
It's definitely a little different.
I just try kind of piggybacking on that idea of being a purpose-driven brand and why that's so important. Um, I know you talked a lot about this in one of your previous TED Talks, which I'll link to in the show notes. I was very inspired by that talk around the importance of having some sort of purpose. And I'm curious, maybe for people who are not so familiar, can you just kind of describe how you would, how you position Soapbox purpose?
Yeah, well, first off, Dan, holy crap, man. Like, out of anyone that's ever done a podcast with me, you have by far won the most researched award. Uh, and there's a funny thing about that TEDx. I got asked to do a TEDx, and I enjoy public speaking. So I went into the first TEDx completely unprepared, and it shows. And the TEDx you're referencing is one that 2 months later, I had the privilege to give another TEDx. And I totally overcorrected, and I was so prepared, and I memorized the whole thing. And I also lowered the tone of my voice. So I like sound like Barry White up there. Like, my voice is not that low, but I was like, purpose. So, uh, to answer your question, Soapbox has always been about the mission. It is it is why we do what we do. It's the whole reason the company was started. And a lot of people ask us, did you start a personal care company and then realize that having this charitable mission was a really cool marketing aspect? Or did you want to start a charitable organization and you realized how to build a company around the organization, and the mission? And it's definitely the latter. And I think we actually probably would have been more successful if it was the former, in the early days. But but how we're able to retain people, how we're able to bat above our weight in terms of getting incredibly experienced professionals from other bigger firms, how we're able to get an audience with either vendors or with customers that we probably shouldn't have the ability to get a seat with. That's where the mission really comes into play, as well as, an authenticity signaler to the consumer that, we are a challenger brand. We are what we say we are. We do care deeply about the ingredients we put in, the toxins we leave out, how we create products, and the amazing manufacturers we work with in the United States to then thoughtfully craft those products. Like, all of that is built on this idea of we are who we say we are. We are this authentic company. We genuinely care about our mission. And we invite people to come and kick our tires. On the back end of each one of our items is something called the Hope Code, where this is a unique number for this specific item. So this isn't a batch code. This isn't, every time we do a run, well, batch code, a label, anything, a SKU. Like, this is this one item that I have in my hand. You can take that code to our website, put it in, and see exactly where that one for one went.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm actually curious, given this long entrepreneurial journey, how would you say the purpose has evolved, if at all, over the years?
That's a really good question. I'm happy to say that the purpose has stayed the same. The company, our branding, our packaging, our every single P that I know that, we've talked about, all of that has changed. Um, but man, the purpose, the why we exist, our mission has always been the same. And that is every time you buy one of our products, we donate a bar of soap. 50% of that stays within the United States, or any country that we're selling in. So we sell in Canada, 50% of what we sell in Canada stays within Canada. In local homeless shelters, food pantries, women and children review centers, so on and so forth.
Got it, got it. Awesome. Well, let's get into more of the business model because a lot of listeners or viewers might be wondering, well, how do you make the economics work if you're donating so much for every single product you sell, right? It's not like a lot of companies out there that donate like 1% of profits, or essentially you guys are doing buy one give one for every single product. I was wondering, maybe you can just walk through the high level economics of the business. Like for example, what channels and how those things break down.
So that is we're transparent about all these things. And I didn't answer, or I didn't finish what I was saying earlier. 50% stays within whatever country we're working in local shelters and homeless pantries, or homeless shelters or food pantries. And then 50% goes abroad through various different partners that we work with. We actually don't ship soap from the country that we're selling in to the places that we have the privilege, and I really mean that, the privilege to serve. So we're working with 501c3 partners on the ground where we're actually sourcing that soap from local makers and our recycling efforts. In terms of how much we actually give, for being a challenger brand, we give a lot, like millions of dollars. So because our commitment is based on the purchase, we're giving a percentage of gross revenue, not of profit. So then if
Hmm.
you were to say, like, what is that percentage of profit? It's significant. Um, so there, I mean, if I were just to say, like, there are multiple times where we'd be far more profitable if we didn't have this mission. So we play the role of kind of like a small family office in terms of our grant writing ability through all of our different charitable partners. We sit on the board of a couple of our charity partners. It's wonderful. I mean, it's the best part of the job that we're able to know. I don't know their names and or faces because I can't precisely pinpoint, um, whose lives we've saved. But I know for a fact that we're approaching 30 million bars that we've donated. If you just look at the statistics, like, we have saved lives. And not we, as in Soapbox, like, our consumers have done this. Because we're really just the conduit, right? Like, our consumers are choosing to buy our shampoo at Walmart or HEB or Amazon or Meijer or Kroger or Wegmans or Rite Aid or CVS or blah 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 blah, blah, fill in name of retailer here. Um, and that's beautiful. Like, Dan, that's the joy. So, like, anytime the rigmarole of, like, oh man, running a company, like, there are good days and bad. There are exhausting days and then more exhausting days. And it makes it all worth it. Totally does.
I feel you, David. I feel you. In my day job, I work on a supply chain planning software startup, so definitely understand how you feel. Uh, one of the aspects of this entrepreneurial journey that a lot of brand founders might be interested in is the kind of the financing journey. I think you mentioned before that it took you guys probably close to 10 years to become accounting profitable. Then maybe in that time you guys were cash flow positive and things like that. But um, it must have been challenging during that time to have the grit and the determination to keep going. And did you guys have to raise a lot of money in order to support yourself, or how did that financing journey look like over those years as you guys worked to getting accounting profitable?
It's a great question. We've been good stewards of capital. We haven't raised as much as most people think. but we did have to raise. And, we also had a couple mistakes that almost killed us. We launched packaging into the market that was awful. That Dan was just, I mean, a monkey with clip art could have done better than what we did. A drunk monkey with clip art. Like it was like what we put, and honestly, the fault of that is mine and mine alone, right? Like I keep a bottle next to me at all times just because I remind myself of it. But like we put that on the shelves of Target and Walmart, and we failed out of both of them because
Can I just say really quickly that reminds me of WD-40.
oh yeah, yeah, that's a compliment compared to what this looks like. This is what we look like today. There's a drastic
Oh yeah.
difference. And back in 2017, when we were exchanging this out for this, company almost went under because there was so much discontinuation and so much markdown fees and like there's a lot. There's a lot that just went absolutely sideways. So we kept our heads down. We convinced some of the family offices that invested us to believe in us again, and we climbed out that trench.
It just shows the power of having that mission behind you, right? You can use that to not just rally your investors, but I imagine at that time you also use it to rally yourself, right? To make sure that you guys had the willpower to keep going. Um, anyways, I think this is the kind of core part of the show that we try to get into what behind the brand looks like. A lot of shows talk about the kind of marketing stunts or the press and the exterior of what a brand looks like, but we like to go kind of deep into the operations and financing and things like that. So just to build upon that, when you mentioned that as you guys were leaving uh, retail channels with that old packaging and bringing in the new packaging, you guys had to deal with a ton of markdown discontinuation. Um, what were some of the mistakes you guys made in terms of not being able to plan that out well and having to maybe take a lot of chargebacks and things like that? And how, if you had to do it again, I guess how would you plan it out differently?
Well, I mean, if I were to do it again, I would have hired a firm right off the bat, like a really good branding firm, and then doing the consumer insights, like doing a ton of sit down, walk us through, and then really sharpening, what is the reason that Soapbox should exist? It's not just the fact that we give back, right? Like how much does that give back matter to our consumer? And what we know definitively is that it does. It's just not as much as we thought it did in the first place. And a lot of our early packaging, you know, was done by me and my co-founder and just a lot of people who really didn't know what we were doing. But we also just didn't spend the time with the consumer like that. Like I can't overemphasize how important it is to really genuinely know like what your consumer is thinking, why she's buying what she's buying, why your competitor is stealing your share, why you're stealing their share. And there are, cheap and thrifty ways of getting to this that are not outside of anyone's reach to really go and understand that consumer. Had we done that at the very beginning, we would have saved millions of dollars. So I don't think like the mistakes we made were so fundamental that it actually has nothing about like, well, how much inventory should you have produced or shouldn't have produced. There's a fundamental flaw in the proposition. So, in other words, like no inventory should have been produced. Um,
Right.
but in terms of, there are obviously tactical ways of looking at this, right? Which is start with a smaller retailer, build less inventory, pay more per unit, don't do anything that locks you into amortizing a mold. Don't overbuy certain components. If you can do turnkey, with a good manufacturing agreement from a contract manufacturer, then do that. There's a bunch of things in which to like early phases of testing something can probably should have been implemented on our side, but we didn't do any of that.
Now you know. Now this is how we grow as entrepreneurs, right? As long as we learn from our mistakes, and
Paid a lot in tuition, Dan. We
yeah,
paid a ton of tuition.
that means the next product launch will be much smoother. And I think this kind of already it's already foreshadowing how I was thinking of talking about this. So uh, wanted to go through in terms of the four P's, right? So we talked about product, right? What to do when there's a new product. Now, in addition, there's also uh, promotion, place, and price, and how you consider these different factors as you're growing and operating the business. Maybe let's talk a little bit more about the place, really, like the channels that you're selling through. So from what I gather online, you guys have great Amazon reviews, seem to be doing really well there, and you also mentioned a ton of retail channels that you guys are in these days. Um, Maybe you can give the listeners a high level overview of how you think about the different distribution channels you're in and how you think about which channels you want to invest more in.
I, it's a great, it's a great question. And honestly, I always go back and forth about like, are there four P's? Are there five P's? Are there six P's? Um, because I also think that the packaging should be up there. Uh, like,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
then proposition. Um, but there's just a lot of P's in marketing. So we'll focus on place. We have the number one selling biotin right now, shampoo in a major mass retailer. We are currently not in the second major mass retailer. So really it's about filling the holes with our hair care line right now. Hair care is our most successful category. We relaunched body wash after spending 2 years of consumer research and like really getting it right. And I'm so proud of how that body wash is done. Body wash for us is just crushed. Um, and it's going to quickly become our second biggest category. The other thing is that like really understanding the hierarchy of where the consumer is per your product, right? So you might have a master brand, but how someone's shopping liquid hand soap is very different than how someone's shopping body wash. And how someone's shopping body wash is night and day different than like how someone's shopping shampoo and conditioner and treatments and stylers. So all that to be said is that like your overall brand promise is one thing, but then dialing in each category to win in its respective category based on the hierarchy of where that consumer is coming to you, like that's really important. Couple things. If I were to do it all over again, I would figure out a product that could work in both D2C, Amazon, start there, have profitable marketing, like figure out like how are you profitable in first purchase, and then I would pour all that money right back into marketing to build a big enough brand, and then I would go into brick and mortar. Now, that only works sometimes, right? So like Eric Ryan of Method and Ali and um, Welly in a less role, but he believes very fervently that omni-channel is the way to go from the very beginning. And that can work if you disrupt a category like he's done a couple times and you have really amazing branding. But I also think that, there's the Dr. Squashes of the world or the Curies of the world that got huge on D2C, built up a big enough following, and then landed on shelves like Function of Beauty also did. Um, So there's a bunch of ways to market. There's a bunch of ways that you can start in various different places. We started on Amazon too late. I think if we would have gotten Amazon right in the very get-go, when there wasn't a lot of health and beauty on Amazon, or at least branded health and beauty, we could have done what Puracy did. But Piracy also hasn't had that great of a run in terms of brick and mortar. You know, they launch in a decent amount of brick and mortar and then fail out. And I think it's because their proposition, their packaging looks really good on a digital shelf, but doesn't always really crush it on a physical shelf. So for everything I say, there's multiple examples how it hasn't worked. And I think really what it comes down to is you got to figure out where your brand promise, where your price, where your positioning is going to best work in its own respective place.
Yeah, and if I just had to kind of distill one thing that I really resonate with is that at the end of the day, it's about deeply understanding the customer value proposition, not just at the brand level, but you said it's at the individual product level, right? Because it's I think you mentioned this before in another conversation where it's great that you guys have a very appealing mission, but at the end of the day, the product also has to appeal to the consumer, the product and the packaging, right? And it has to appeal to the consumer, and you have to appeal to your retail buyers as well. So thinking from the kind of first principles there is pretty important. Um, I know you guys also are in a lot of hotels, and I think probably something like millions of samples a year, right? How did you guys decide that in addition to Amazon and the D2C channels and retail, you guys would also benefit from sampling in hotels? What was the calculus there?
Well, Dan, that's a great question. Hotels always were a way for us to sample. They were a way for us to be able to build and grow and expand all the different touch points that we could potentially get in front of people who were exploring our brand, who were, showing up at a hotel and have this great experience with the Soapbox product and go, "Ooh, I want to buy this." And we do about 40 million in terms of samples in North America every year. We do that through a licensing agreement. We also do that direct with a couple partners. Um, but that has been, such an interesting and different route because when you sell into, a retailer, food, drug, mass club, specialty, natural, convenience, value, whatever it might be, you're in for maybe 6 months, 12 months before you review again. Whereas when you lock something with Marriott, that's a 3 to 6 year contract.
Oh
And
wow.
it's a much longer sales cycle. But like once you're locked in, you are locked in. Um, so that's been really interesting. It's a different type of service that you have with that customer, and it's wonderful. And we view it as something that's a part of our flywheel that builds back into discovery and brand awareness, and it also allows us to donate millions of bars of soap through those type of partnerships. So incredibly grateful for those partners, incredibly grateful for the guests that come and get to experience our thoughtfully crafted, free from toxins and harsh chemical natural products.
And with all these different channels, um, how do you guys make sure that you're adequately allocating inventory across all the different channels, right? Making sure that you have the inventory. It has that ever been an issue for you?
Oh man, 2020 was the craziest time of all, right? So 2020 was we grew by 10x, and I mean, as with any consumer product anywhere, like 2020 was insane. It was either terrible or awful or wonderful in terms of like demand was off the charts. Not wonderful that there's a global pandemic happening, but all that to be said, yeah, it was wild. Like we went from a couple contract manufacturers to like 12. We pulled in inventory from all parts of the world. We airlifted bottles from Bangladesh at one point. Um, it was wild. 2020 was absolutely insane. I my my business, like my co-founder and I hardly slept all of 2020. doubled our team. Like, it's insane.
That's incredible. And as you guys are going through these periods of rapid growth, as you're uh, expanding in terms of new doors and within retail distribution channels, do you guys ever have issues with stockouts or overstock?
Yeah. So we have a really good relationship network with value retailers that basically we thankfully have gotten really good at forecasting and planning, and that's through years of trial and error and understanding our lead times and how everything flows together, and bringing in more seasoned professionals that have worked in more complex organizations and bring that professional processes to us. So we have a whole network of people that we work with to help sell components to help sell finished goods to. Um, in 2020 specifically, we made a ton of hand sanitizer, thankfully, that didn't smell like tequila. But yet, when the music stopped and everyone was running around the chairs, you very quickly could get left with a lot of hand sanitizer. So we had $5 million worth in cost hand sanitizer left over after 2020.
Wow, that's
It's a
incredible.
wild ride.
Yeah, and I guess between the craziness of 2020 and today, what would you say is like the some of the things that helped you guys forecast more accurately? Is there
His,
any specifics?
historical
Just getting
historical
better.
data.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Historical data allows you to look at a lot of different. So what we do is we forecast SKU by SKU, customer by customer, week by week. And then we also have a promotional tab that we are able to build in additional ebbs and flows.
Hmm.
And that granular ground up approach on a per SKU level, on a time period week by week, allows us to plug in a whole bunch of variables and then spit out into our MRP what we need to produce by when we need to produce it. And there are some customers like Walmart that are absolutely fantastic in terms of what they think the forecast is going to be. And there are other customers that shall not be named that are awful. And you got to be okay with the fact that like this you're kind of dependent upon the sophistication of your customer. And the ones that are less sophisticated, we take a more active role in managing their inventory for them, where they'll put in a big order and be like, hey, we noticed that the POS is not that high on this item. What's the deal? Do
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
really need to order this much? Because we don't want to out of stock all these other customers. So having those type of really candid conversations with great retail partners is incredibly important. The historical knowledge, the historical data, understanding, just the intricacies of different retailers in terms of what their reorder patterns look like. Once you do a pipe, how long is it going to take for them to actually start ordering again? What's the cases that they usually order per SKU? And then, it just
Of
depends. Then there's seasonality in the year.
course.
It's like, okay, so when's this retailer's fiscal year going to be over? Because they're probably going to slow down ordering.
Yeah, I mean, what you mentioned there about some retailers being less sophisticated forecasting, that's been a huge pain point that I've heard from many other brand founders, and being able to take their historical sell through and kind of guide, almost like forecast on behalf of the retailer, and have those honest conversations. That must be a huge win for you guys as you guys are expanding into new channels and new doors. Um, Speaking of promotions earlier, let's kind of quickly move on to that, P. Uh, you mentioned before, I think hair care, which is your hero category, is one of the top 4 or 5 most advertised categories in consumer goods. And you guys are competing against P&G, against Johnson Johnson, all the other big brands. What's been your
L'Oreal.
L'Oreal? Yeah, what's been your strategy to stay relevant and cut through the noise with your promotions?
Partner with your retailers. Have really candid conversations with the buyers, especially buyers who've been there for a while. Hey, what works? What doesn't work? Where should I spend my money? And then if you're across a couple categories, usually you're able to find the truth across a couple different buyers. Case in point, buyer, has been told by leadership that they want, more and more brands signing up for this new flavor of the year marketing program that isn't going to generate actually that much return in terms of lift. But it's something that the retailer wants to experiment with and they want their brands to pay for it. Great. Well, the problem with that is now you're like, well, crap. How do I know if this buyer is trying to sell me on something that leadership wants them to do, or uh, if it's actually really going to increase the lift? And that's where I think, once again, being a mission-driven brand, being a challenger brand, we're able to say, look, we have this much money, and we want as much of this money going to the most effective ways to drive, increase in velocity in your particular account. All the below the line, all the outside store marketing, we already got that. TikTok, influencers, over the top, television, all that. We're doing that. We got that. Digital marketing, got that. But I want to specifically talk about the 10-15% I've allotted for you, Mr. Retailer, Mrs. Retailer, uh, in what's going to really move. And that's usually when a buyer will tell you the truth. Don't do this program, don't do that program, do this program. I've seen this do really well. Absolutely participate in this thing that we do, twice a year. So that's what I would say. Promotion, different retailers have different levels of promotion. Like Walmart has EDLC, right? But they still have ways that they promote. And it doesn't always have to be through a rollback, right? Get a sidekick, get a four-way. Like find these other different ways that like you're going to have to probably give them some type of something in order to be a part of that display, but you should absolutely do it. 100% do it. So there's a lot of different ways in which you can promote within your retail partners.
Makes a lot of sense. Again, going back to the relationship building, I think that's been a key theme so far. Beyond the relationship building and the promotions within retail, you mentioned there's promotions out of store. One of the really cool stunts I heard you guys put on was build the world's biggest bottle of soap, and you guys would
We
bring
did.
it to retail partners in their parking lots. You would park it outside, and that would generate. I'm sure the retail partner is also very happy about that because it brings a lot of local press and it gives them more foot traffic too. So tell me more about how that promotion played out in terms of sales velocity and the impact of it.
That was a lot of fun. We built the world's biggest bottle of soap. We got a Guinness Book of World Record on it. And then we drove that thing to 16 US cities. It generated over 900 million impressions across radio, TV, digital. Uh, it did a lot of good for us. It did not move the needle in terms of sales as much as we thought, but it definitely showed a lot of our customers that we could do big things and that we were a brand that was going to stay around and that we were a brand that was committed to winning. So, man, it was a lot of fun. It achieved a lot of objectives. So very happy for all those things and more. But in terms of gimmicks that you can do, if any of your listeners want to hit me up, just find us on Soapbox. Just hello@soapboxsoaps.com. Even though we just go by Soapbox, and I'll tell you everything you need to know about crazy gorilla stunts that we pulled off.
That's incredible. I'll definitely put that in the show notes as well. And I guess going into that guerrilla campaign, were you guys expecting a increase in sales, or was it always thought of as, hey, this is going to be a brand exercise. This is going to be a exercise that shows we're ready to be part of the big leagues.
I think it was both. I think we were hoping that we were going to see an increase in sell through, which we did a little bit, but nowhere near what we had hoped we would think. Not that we had hoped we were going to see. But Dan, I'd do it all over again. That thing has continued to pay off in dividends because it just generated so much awareness and so much excitement. Um, and it's something that I think a lot of brand leaders don't have the cojones to do.
Mhm.
So I'm glad that we did it for all those reasons and more. But there it didn't do everything that we had hoped it was going to do, but it did do a lot.
Well, this is kind of like the old adage, right? You can't predict, but you can prepare, right? This is no one can forecast what's going to happen in the future with perfect accuracy, but the best you can do is just prepare for the worst, hope for the best sometimes.
Amen to that. There's
Um,
one of my favorite sayings is you're really only in charge of two things in life, and that is how much you prepare and how you act accordingly after whatever happens happens.
right, right. Well, this takes us to our final marketing P, or maybe um, not include the additional two that you had brought up, but when it comes to pricing, maybe walk our listeners through how you guys decide on the pricing strategy when it comes to this base price, potential seasonal discounts, coupons, and
Mhm.
how do you guys know it's time to increase the price, things like that?
I think there are a lot of different indicators that you see in the market, whether it's okay for a price increase. I think the number one is that are you receiving price increasing increases from your supply chain? Um, I think pricing is also a signaler to the consumer in terms of quality, in terms of ingredients. So we are not opening price point at all. We're about 150, sometimes 160 uh, to the index, and that's okay. We're completely fine with that. We like playing in that position. We are very conscious about how we play against like for like competitors, though, with similar claims and RTBs. Um, so we're conscious of all those factors that I just listed when it comes to price.
Makes a lot of sense. And then I guess just to kind of summarize all of these different uh, four Ps, 4 to 6 Ps, let's put it that way. Um, what area of the business would you say has been the biggest driver of demand volatility?
Growth,
Growth in terms of distribution or in terms of new products or what kind of growth?
distribution.
Got it.
You
And
don't
then,
you don't know how you don't. I mean, it's new products too, but like you don't know how well you're. So you can get into a mass account, right? And you can get into the other mass account, but you have no idea how well you're going to do in the new mass account, even though it's a like for like similarity. Like you don't necessarily know. There's still a slightly different consumer. And then when it comes to like new product launches, you don't know if it's going to go well or not. So we've
mhm.
taken the viewpoint of go as lean as possible into a new product category until you start to see the early embers of a fire. And there's sometimes we launch something and we know it's a dud within the first 2 weeks of POS. And there's some that we know that we have a winner after the first like 3 days. And some of our retail partners give us daily granularity. Some of our retail partners give us every 15 minutes. It's amazing. So
Wow.
yeah, Dan, just as a warning to all of the either listeners and or people watching us, don't do that because that could be highly addictive in the refresh button of every 15 minutes of a new product launch.
Yeah, I hope when you guys are starting, you didn't go into like the Walmart portal, the Target portal, whatever, and start refreshing every 15 minutes.
Dan, I still do
Oh man.
that. Ah.
Well, it's good to know so many people are supporting Soapbox that you getting that kind of meaningful data back. Um, and then when it comes to managing this demand volatility, how do you think about balancing that demand with your supply? You mentioned one tactic is just always have very honest conversations with retail partners, but do you guys use any other tactics?
Oh, totally. The you know, we have professionals, thankfully, in each department within our organization. So most CPG companies are broken down into operations, sales, marketing, finance, and accounting. And finance and accounting being one. department. Um, so we have S&OP, we have stage gate, we have, all of these stand-up meetings where we basically check our forecast versus demand versus our inventory versus, WIP. We do that on a weekly basis. So I would say that great decisions are made by great teams, and great teams are made of people. So hire great people.
Absolutely. And finally, this the mission that ties those people together, right? So awesome. Well, David, I know we're getting to the end, and just wanted to recap with one final question. Um, as an entrepreneur, there's many highs and lows you have to deal with that you mentioned previously. How do you manage to stay balanced?
Mm. One of the things that's happened with me, as well as the other team members who've been here for a while, is you start to just balance out the good with the bad. So a lot of perspective, a lot of muscle memory, kind of calluses are built up. So the good news isn't that great anymore, and the bad news isn't that terrible. So there's kind of a leveling out. And then I think you also just build a big, deep reservoir of wisdom and resilience and determination that when things get really bad, it's not that bad. Like it has been worse, like this is a minor setback, but we'll get through it. We've had products discontinued before, but we get more in. We have whatever it might be. It's perspective and experience. Definitely help level out the bad news. And unfortunately moderate, the fist pumping, running around the office with a, champagne bottle like we did on some of the very early ones. Those are true stories. Those are absolutely true stories. Running around the office with a champagne bottle, just spraying a bunch of people. Yeah, we don't do that anymore.
You still got to remember to celebrate the small wins from time to time, though,
Oh, I
David.
hear you,
Maybe,
man. I
yeah,
hear you, Dan. We celebrate. We just don't do it like we did back in the early days.
absolutely. Well, again, David, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. Really appreciate you sharing all these words of wisdom with our listeners. And as a final treat to everyone listening, David is offering 10% off on the website with the discount code uh, BTB. That's for BTB for Behind the Brand 10. Did I get that accurate, David?
Yeah, 100%. Just go to soapbox.co or soapboxsoaps.com. We own both those domains. Still trying to buy soapbox.com. Motley Fool, if you hear us, please take our lowball offer. But yeah, B2B10, either all caps or underscore. And we'd love to give you a little something for sticking with us and listening all the way to here.
Fantastic. Thanks again, David, and take care.
Dan, thank you. It's been such an honor.